John, good evening and welcome, and thanks for joining us tonight. So now, without giving anybody coordinates for a torpedo attack or anything, whereabouts are you?
I'm in Moreton Bay in Queensland. I've been at sea since last week. I had to get out of, I was tied up at a marina right in Brisbane City, and I just had to get out because there was too many normies around me, and I was being driven mad. And coming out to sea is a big reconnection with myself. It's a very spiritual experience when you're out at sea.
Yeah. So you're still inside of the coast, of course, aren't you?
Yes. I'm
in Moreton Bay.
I've got Moreton Island and North Stradbroke Island on the outside. That's where, if you go outside, that's where the continental shelf drops off, and you go into 1 kilometre or deeper water out there. But no, I'm in the bay.
Okay, awesome. And I'd really want to thank you again for joining us, because we sort of almost kidnapped you last night, or somebody did, and you just turned up, and then we roped you into coming here this evening. Now, what I'd like to do is just have people because a lot of people are already aware of you, but can you give us in just a shortened version of your history and how you got to be where you're at and thinking the way that you do, because you've got quite a jam-packed history, and this is an opportunity for you to tell us what you want to tell us.
Well, look, at 12 years of age, I was incarcerated in the worst children's institution this country has ever seen. I was the second longest institutionalised child since World War II at 5 years. I spent 5 years inside this place.
Yeah.
And I've never been to high school. I've never, had any of those normal childhood upbringings. I've been fighting for my life and for my freedom ever since I was a kid. So
when you say that you never went to high school, so while you were incarcerated, did they have a learning program inside where you were?
No, you were flogged and worked. You were flogged and worked every day, 7 days a week, every day. You either milked cows, you looked after farm animals, you cooked food, you cleaned, you done maintenance work, whatever had to be done.
Okay, so John, how did you get there?
I bashed coppers.
But you were 12.
Yeah, I had a Queensland police officer under the Joe Bjelke-Peterson regime who gave me a flogging, and I went to my father, who was a waterside worker, and I said, Dad, this copper belted me up, and he said, well, what are you telling me for? He said, go and flog the bastard. So I done a bit of reconnaissance. I got his shift. He was on a night shift. He finished work at about 11 p.m. He walked down the steps of the Valley Police Station here in Brisbane, and I attacked him with a full-face motorcycle helmet and beat him to a pulp.
And you were 12 when you did that?
Yeah.
Now, of course, you've got a bit of an advantage because you're like, what, 6'6", aren't you?
No, I'm 5'7".
Oh, you're kidding me.
No.
So not the size of the dog in the fight, mate. The size of the fight in the dog.
You got it. You got it. I've owned 4 Jack Russell Terriers, mate, and I can attest that is a fact.
Okay, so you said a couple of things last night that I didn't like hearing, not because you shouldn't have said it, but just because it was some of the things that you've experienced are quite distressing. So from the age of 12, did you have much to do with your parents then after you were incarcerated?
Oh, yeah. I've got, you've got to remember there's 10 kids in my family, 10 children. And my mother and father, there's no spoon feeding in my family. My mother was a saint. She died at the age of 95, and my father died at the age of 89. But it was just that these were the times. My father was a wharfie, worked on the waterfront, and it was tough to even feed your family.
So your brothers and sisters, they didn't suffer the same sort of thing that you did?
One other brother, but most of my brothers and sisters have gone on and occupied very high offices. Very high offices.
Okay. Now, while we're in there, and I don't know how far you want to go into it, and you do what you will, and you've already told me, basically, I can ask you anything, I can do anything, but it's also always up to you how far you go. So one of the things that is behind the reason why I have to do things, and I'd say the majority of the people that are here, or if not all of them, is because of the sort of activities that are undertaken by these so-called elites and the way they use children. And you said something last night, which I think is, when you said it, you were telling us one of the things that keeps you moving forward because you couldn't stand it, and it was what you heard. And we're not here to shock everybody, but we are here to wake people up a little bit to the reality that's going to come down on us if we can't stand together and defeat these people because of what they're prepared to do to children. Would you mind sharing that last night, what you shared last night?
Look, Stephen, I'm 60 and I am driven. I get out of bed every morning and I'm furious. I'm full of righteous anger. That is my fuel. I don't let anger blind me, but it's righteous anger. And what we discussed last night is, I mean, I've got no problems with talking about any of this.
Yep.
But I was institutionalised in the worst child institution this country's ever seen. It's now closed. Went through some big Senate inquiries and royal commissions and other investigations. So everything I say is on the record. It is a matter of fact.
Yep.
Been recorded. But what we discussed last night was this. Look, other people talk about, and it just rolls off their lips. They talk about the deep state. They talk about theirs. And I've lived it. I have lived it. Now, one of the things that I've lived, right, is in the next cell next to me, right, is a young 13-year-old child being brutally gang raped. Now, nothing I could do. I'm locked in a cell, mate. I can't do anything, right? I can't do anything. But if you sit down for 1 hour, and listen to the terror and the screams and the begging of mercy coming from a young child when he's being gang raped, you'll never forget it. It's burned into my memory now. I'm 60. It's over 40 years ago, and it was like yesterday. One of my great strengths is that I'm not a big, tall guy. I'm low to the ground. But the cell doors only allow one screw at a time. One person can only get in that door at a time. And whenever any screws came, tried to enter my cell, I would take them apart. I would take them apart. I was a ferocious fighter. Now, there was one other time where you know, I had to defend myself. There was three screws coming at me. They were going to literally flog me into, belt me into a pulp. And I pulled out the cord of a 20-litre boiling hot urn because it was in a kitchenette. I pulled it out and picked it up with my bare hands and threw it and give it to them. And you should have seen them. They squealed like a loose fan belt. Now, they belted me. They got me after that and belted my hands. They broke both my hands into a pulp in revenge.
And what age were you then, John?
14 or 15 years of age.
Yeah.
I went in at the age of 12, 3 months before my 13th birthday, and I came out 5 weeks before my 17th birthday. On the 17th of March, 1977, which is St. Patrick's Day. They let me out.
Okay. Now, look, I don't want to make light of anything, but I also don't want to go right in depth because we want to move in later on in your life. But just to give people a bit of an idea, say for a 5-year period from 12 to 17, do you have any idea how many children went through what you just described?
Hundreds of them. Hundreds of them. The children from other institutions, right, the Catholic Institute, because I was in a Queensland state government institution. It wasn't a religious institution. But other children from the Catholic institutions, from the Salvation Army institutions, from the Jewish institutions, from the Church of England institutions, they would run away, break out, cause trouble, blah, blah. And then eventually they would get sent to Westbrook, the worst of the lot. And I would talk to them. I would listen to their stories. And the reason why they would be so outrageous in their behaviour is because they were being trafficked out into pedophile rings. And there was hundreds of them. And again, all of this is on the records. The Children's Royal Commission into Institutional Pedophilia, it's all out there now. But again, other people talk about it. I lived all this. I lived it.
Yeah.
Now, I've seen hundreds of damaged kids, and they are now all damaged adults.
Yeah.
You understand? Let me tell you one. I just want to give you an example. The kids, the Murphy brothers in Sydney, in cohort with a couple of others, many, many years ago, 30 years ago, they kidnapped and raped a young nurse, Anita Cobby. They brutalised this young nurse. They brutalised her. I mean, horrifically. They tied her up with barbed wire and threw her in a dam and drowned her and killed her. Now, people were calling for those young kids, they were like in their 20s, to be hung, executed. Now, I went and spoke to some of my Irish friends of mine who knew that family, and they told me that those two brothers were farmed out amongst pedophile rings in Sydney's King's Cross, where they would put newspapers over the windows and keep these two young brothers in there for days, and where men, a dozen men would rape them time and time again. So you are not just looking at victims who suffer here, you are triggering and creating monsters in many cases, monsters by doing this. When you damage kids like that, they grow up totally and utterly damaged. And some of them go on to do some horrific things. Now, I'm not forgiving the Murphy brothers for what they did to that young nurse whatsoever. But I'll tell you what, they weren't the only two that needed to be executed. Those perverted, bloody pedophile monsters that did it to those brothers, they needed to be hauled into the scene as well and dealt with.
Exactly. Now, listen, when you're incarcerated, did you have any awareness of whether this was contained within the walls, or were there outside parties coming in that used to visit to like engage in these activities? Was it a sort of like a revolving door, or?
No, it was institutionalized. The Salvation Army, look, I'll give you one example. The Salvation Army boys' home at a suburb called Riverview, halfway between Brisbane and Ipswich. They used to farm out the boys. Friday night, pedophiles would come in their cars, right, protected by the Queensland Police, right? They would come and make their picks. They would pick a half a dozen young boys and take them away for the weekend, and then bring them back on Monday morning after they brutalised them all weekend in sex parties. I've had young kids tell me that police officers had done it to them. I've had young kids tell me that judges and legals have done it to them. I've known ever since I was a young kid that this is prolific. It's prolific. And it goes all the way up into all of our institutions. Now, I've never known it was as industrial scale as I do now. I thought it was institutionalized, sure, but now I understand that it's not just this is in a whole industry, an industry. I'll give you an example. One pimp can get a young 8-year-old child, a little girl, and over 1 year, he can sell her body time and time and time again. And he can make $250,000 cash out of that one young child. You got me?
Mm.
And we've got these pimps everywhere. And I don't want to just talk about judges and all the rest of it, right? As bad as what they are. I know as a fact. I'm an industrial relations specialist, human resources. I've worked in mining, oil, gas, big jobs. I don't get out of bed for under, $300,000-400,000 a year. They pay me top dollar. But we have fly-in, fly-out workers, tradesmen, scaffolders, who when they do their 3 weeks on, 1 week off, or 8 days off, whatever, they fly back to the capital city, they jump on a plane, they fly to Southeast Asia, Thailand, or one of those, or the Philippines, where they have their own pimps waiting for them at the airport. And they go overseas and have little girls, 10-year-old girls, and they rape them. They pay big money. So it ain't just up the top end of the business class here, mate. It's us. It is us. And we have an infection. We have a very bad infection in our country.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not good, obviously, not good. Now, from the age of 17, that's when you were no longer incarcerated?
Yeah, I went on, I become a plant operator, driving heavy machinery, learning at first and building up. And I worked in different projects. I ended up in Canberra, ACT, the capital of Australia. I worked driving big earth moving equipment on the Parliament House in Canberra. I've actually built the Parliament House in Canberra, one of the key players. I became a trade union delegate for my union, which was the Federated Engine Drivers, the Plant Operators Union, which is an industrial revolution union that came out of the steam era, which of course now has been replaced by diesel. And I went from a delegate. I was then asked to stand as an elected officer in the union as a organizer, which I was successful. And then I was then subsequently asked to stand as a secretary of the union. So I become the leader. The secretary is the most powerful position within the trade unions, that and the president. And then several years after that, I ended up becoming president of the Trades Hall Council in Canberra, which is the peak trade union body.
So what age?
Unions. I had 100,000 trade union members of all denominations under my authority.
So what age would you have been at that stage, John?
I was 29 years of age.
With a wealth of experience. Now, by the time you're 29, the new Parliament House would have been complete?
Just about completed. The Queen came over and she opened the Parliament House, I think in 89, somewhere around there. Not long after that, we had Nelson Mandela come over to Australia to thank the Australian people for their support against anti-apartheid and so on. I was part of all of that as well. Yeah. I mean, we had a picket line on the South African embassy for several years. Myself and Charles McDonald, I was the president of Trades Hall Council. Charles McDonald was the secretary. We were the first ones, the very first ones in the world to be told that the apartheid was coming down. We were called over to the gate at the South African embassy by the ambassador. He asked us to come in. I said, no way. I said, we walk in there, mate, that's South African territory. You can kill us and you've got diplomatic immunity. So we made an agreement to meet at the National Press Club. And myself and Charles went down there, and it was like 10 days before this information was released to the world, where he said, you've won. Apartheid is coming down and Mandela will be released. So the reason for me saying this is that I've been part of historical moments.
That's what I was going to say.
You don't realise it at the time. You just don't. I was a young guy, right? But looking back and reflecting on my life, I can't believe some of the stuff that I've been involved in. I mean, I say to myself, Jesus Christ, you've been involved in all sorts of stuff.
Well, let's, before we get into those things, can we just move back to the Parliament House and the building of the new Parliament House?
Yep.
I worked with a fellow, I was selling real estate in Canberra at the time.
Yep.
And I worked with a fellow that came selling real estate, but he had an agitator. He was, had a concrete truck. Yep. And he was working at going to Parliament House. And he said that he would go inside there and he'd be directed and he'd be ushered back and stop. And he said he used to just let the whole load go and never had any idea where it went. Yep. He said it was just like there was this huge hole. Are you aware of any subterranean things? How deep does Parliament House go?
I know everything about it. My best friend, his name is Stephen King, and he was the principal union delegate on that job. He was a tower crane driver for 6 years, and I know everything about that project, the whole lot inside and out. It's a huge Masonic monument, and but I'm not going to go into any details on this in this forum on it. But the answer is yes. I've also written because I've built tunnels. Again, other people it just rolls off their lips about tunnels and kids in. I built them. I built huge, big tunnels here in Australia. So I know all about working.
Without latitude and longitude, are we talking about tunnels underneath populated areas, or are they in more remote areas?
No, they're all over the place. I mean, one big tunnel that I worked on, the North Side Storage Tunnel, and I've published an article about this. It's in Sydney. It's a huge tunnel, 16 kilometres long, and it goes all the way through the North Shore, Lane Cove, Tunks Park, all the lower North Shore, all the wealthy areas.
Yeah.
So,
well, what's the purpose of a tunnel like that, as far as you know?
It's a sewerage overflow tunnel. When the rains hit, all the water goes down the downpipes, and a lot of houses have their downpipes connected into the sewerage pipe. So the sewerage becomes flooded. So the sewerage system would overflow into the harbour. So you had this beautiful harbour with $1 million homes on it, with turds and condoms and toilet paper floating in it. And it took a couple of weeks after the storms for the tidal currents to push it all out to sea. This tunnel, when it overflowed, it captured it underground, waited for the rains to stop, and then the end of the tunnel is at North Head in Sydney, which is all hollowed out. I mean, you've got 400 metres of big, huge caverns under that North Head. And they then pump it up, treat it at the North Head Sewage Treatment Plant, and then push it out through the deep ocean outfall pipes.
Yep. Okay. So now, are there other tunnels that you've built that you could say weren't for that sort of purpose? They may have had some other use, whether you're aware of it or not?
No. The tunnels, I mean, the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, the airport tunnel. These are road infrastructure tunnels. But can they be used for other things? Like can they
have
dig
other
a
purposes?
detour off that tunnel and take it elsewhere? Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, in Melbourne recently, I mean, again, Transfield, the company that I worked for several years. Now, Franco Belgiorno Nettis, the owner of Transfield, is mentioned in the same breath as the greatest industrialist of the 20th century. I mean, he was a huge figure of a man, although he's a little guy. But he was tied right into the Pope and the Vatican. The Pope John Paul came to Australia, and he stayed at Franco Belgiorno Nettis's house in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and he gave mass. He gave mass at the Transfield Seven Hills factory. Pope John Paul done a huge site visit to one of the big tunnels. Yep. So, I'm not pointing the fingers here, because the Belgiorno Nettis family were very good to me. They were very good to me, and I'm not aware of any activities that would raise suspicions of the ones that we may be talking about. But I'm just simply saying, while other people, talk about tunnels and stuff like that, rolls off the lips, just, yeah. Well, I built them. I've worked underground for years. I've also done long wall mining underground, 2 kilometres underground, doing long wall coal mining.
Yeah.
So, and it's a different planet down there.
Yeah, so you've got a good awareness of what can actually be achieved underground.
Yes, and also all the machinery, tunnel boring machines, road headers, rock bolting, all that stuff. I've also gone into the patents and looked at some of the new technology when it comes to building tunnels.
Yeah.
Stuff, there's patents that go back to 1972 and 1974, mate, which are mind-blowing. I mean, mind-blowing tech.
Well, one of the ones that I was aware of, and you can tell me if this is fantasy or not, was basically a machine that I think was operating as like a laser, and as it goes through, it literally melts the exterior of the.
That's one of the patents.
Yeah.
It melts the rock, and the rock, when it solidifies, goes around the tunnel boring machine, and it hardens up. It's like glass. It seals the tunnel from any water entry, but it also makes the tunnel structurally sound, solid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the tunnel boring machine, these are the patents. They don't need an external power source. Normal TBMs, the ones you use right now, you've got to feed electricity in, you've got to feed water in, you've got to feed, then you've got to bring the spoil out.
And you've also got to get rid of it. You've got exhaust as well, haven't you?
Yes, you've got to put oxygen, big fan blowers down there to keep air movement and stuff. These patented stuff, none of that is necessary. They have their own inbuilt power system. It's a nuclear power system using a substance, a nuclear byproduct called thorium or thorum.
Yes. Oh, I knew a physicist. Yeah. Now that's very, very interesting. Now, one thing that I find when I'm talking to you, John, is that you're very passionate and you're very descriptive, but when there's something that you don't know about, you don't pretend to. And that's something that I admire in you and what I've seen in you. So with everything that you've done, with what happened to you as a child and what you went through, that sort of set you up in a certain direction. But then when you got involved in unions and things like that, can you tell us, without necessarily going into specifics, what sort of control there is as far as who's on whose side and whether the unions were looking after the workers, or was there politicians trying to take charge, or were there other outside interests that were trying to influence how things went?
Look, when I went into the unions, it was before the epoch of union amalgamations, right? Union amalgamations, it's the same as they build the big corporates through corporate takeovers. Union amalgamations, same thing. Now, we had a couple of hundred different craft unions, craft-based unions. Like my union, the Federated Engine Drivers, we were all crane drivers, all earthworks operators, boiler, anything that was related to steam in the Industrial Revolution. But then you had a carpenters union, a plumbers union, an electrical union. They were all craft-based unions. And when I came into the trade union movement, I was trained and mentored by the communists, right? They were the smartest cookies you've ever come across.
So when you say communist, so we got a particular country, or is this just a spattering of people from different communist countries?
No, here in Australia. They were all Australian communists.
Okay.
The Communist Party of Australia. I was trained and mentored by the communists. I am a fully made man. I'm a fully initiated communist, mate. I've been through everything. You got me. Yep. I'm the last of the Mohicans, baby. The last of them. Now, the guy that trained and mentored me, to just give you an example, was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Australia, a guy called Laurie Aarons. Now, Laurie Aarons was the most powerful person in Australia. most powerful person in Australia. He had 2 government ministers inside the Whitlam government that were card-carrying communists, dual card carry, member of the Labor Party, member of the Communist Party. You understand? He knew what was going on right in the heart of government. Now, Laurie was one of the most decent men. He was a Jew, right? He was a Jew, for all those Jew haters out there. But, you know, I love this guy. And he was a smart cookie, man. His sons, one of his sons, Mark Aaron, you got 3 boys, but Mark Aaron, they work for the ABC. They've written books. They're well known. The Aarons family are well known.
Okay,
now,
go on. I shouldn't.
Laurie Aarons was under surveillance by ASIO for 20 years. 20 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 20 years. And when after Laurie retired, Laurie was a part-time taxi driver down in the Shire, down around Cronulla. He lived at Manibar in the Royal National Park. I spent Easter with him down there, 5 days with him and his wife, Carolyn. Now, he was a very humble, decent man, very humble, decent man. And there's no way in the world he would have supported all this bullshit that's going on today. No way. But he died a very, you know, a very, very humble man, mate. Again, he drove taxis, you know, 3 nights a week just to top up his pension.
Yep.